Welcome to Common Sense. I'm John.
And I'm Ed. How are you, John?
I'm doing great, Ed. How are you?
Cool.
Freezing your keisters off yet?
Well, it's not that cold yet, but it's gray and dreary, and the headlights are coming on outside. I see street lights coming on. It's 2 o'clock Eastern time or 2:30 Eastern time.
Oh my God!
This time of year is a drag.
It's the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to take a different tack today, and we're going to dive into what could potentially be very controversial. And so we're going to start with some disclaimers. Obviously, we're two middle-aged white guys. One's clearly a boomer. One's kind of borderline Gen X and boomer. We've had a fairly easy background in terms of our education and that kind of stuff. And we haven't been subjects or the object of discrimination to either of our knowledge. We're on rather different political ends of the spectrum, and so kind of come at issues from different angles. But we think that we're qualified to talk about this topic because, we're people and we're professionals and we're in businesses and we see a lot of companies that are doing business. So what's this topic that I'm so nervously introducing? It's really a question of gender equality or gender participation in sales and marketing. And I guess let's kind of start with just anecdotal or gut feeling, what we see when we go to marketing events. And then there's a ton of great statistics that you put together, John, that you'll run through for us. And so I think the starting point for this conversation, we're going to kind of come around to it full circle as we finish up. But when you go to a marketing event like the Inbound Conference or any of the MarTech software user conferences, you get the very clear impression that the majority of that community, the people that are using that software and they're there to learn about it, tend to be younger women. And I mean, it's I don't know exactly what the number and what the ratio and distribution is, but it's a very substantial percentage of that community. But rather than just go with gut feeling or observation, you've got some stats, John. So take us through those.
Well, I want to give thanks to Anna Maria Beach, who on Facebook, I was doing some little research, and she pointed me to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which has all this basically pertinent data. So thought I'd just run through some of these pretty quick. It kind of, it certainly emphasizes your point or backs up your point about a majority of women in marketing, but I thought we'd also ask about sales and then also talk about leadership positions and the compensation gap, if there is one. So starting off with marketing, 45.3% of marketing and sales managers are women. And I thought it was interesting, but they also have ethnic minority statistics. So the diversity there, it's 86.4% white. So that's kind of interesting. That's not our topic today, but still kind of amazing. Something to talk about anyway at some point. Market research analysts and marketing specialists, 60.8% women, 84.2% white. Writers and authors, 60.9% women, 86% white. Web developers, only 32% women, 82% white. And then another statistic I found from a Moz survey in 2015, 30.1% of online marketers were women, which was up from 22.7% in 2012. And they point out that it's mostly people who follow Moz, so these are mostly SEO people, somewhat on the technical side, so that would lead you to believe that women are less inclined to take those technical positions, although we could argue that point. Certainly that's changed since 2015. I think the SEO world has gone more towards a holistic approach with content strategy and so on being as important as technical SEO. So anyway, I doubt that that number still pertains. So that's kind of the spread, and you know, women in mostly in, as you said, managerial and below levels are dominantly women, and the technical side is maybe the exception to that, although I think that's probably changing. So, you know, the question is why? You know,
Yeah, so
why?
there's the stats. And so,
Yeah,
you know, nobody knows exactly what the answer is, and we can hypothesize, which we'll do a little bit of, because we're kind of build an argument that we think impacts the way companies are doing business. And that's where we're ultimately going with this
right.
conversation. But why could it be? I mean, you know, it could be gender stereotypes. It could be, I know I see in exporting, I believe that women tend to be better at export business because they tend to be more empathetic. If you look at the psychographics, they generally are more empathetic, and that could well be an explanation in marketing. You know, there's a lot of disciplines, the whole blow up at Google about men versus women in technical roles. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about that. What seems to be clear across a lot of statistics is that there are more men in technical roles for whatever the reason may be. There's also, I think, some people that would argue perhaps that women are better at B2C and men are better at B2B, although I don't subscribe to that, but you know, maybe there's some assumptions around that. What other kinds of, you know, why else could this be the way it is?
Well, it could be the way that, I mean, it could be for a lot of reasons. It could be that women are raised to believe a certain thing as well as men, you know, like men should be in the military and women should be in, you know, the healthcare, you know, things, gender stereotypes like that are often kind of, I think they're reinforced from the past. So if you look at the Mad Men era, things were way different then, but some of that no doubt is still present out there, especially with men hiring. You know, they may feel this way. So the roles themselves aren't necessarily the ones that women would choose, but they're the ones that men hire them for. So, you know, it's complicated. And
Maybe a piece of the whole creative. You know, people associate marketing traditionally with the creative as a creative discipline as opposed to an empirical discipline, and there's certainly a blend of it, but maybe that accounts for some of it.
well, I think that's another one of those things that people argue about. And I've known plenty of creative men as well as women. I've known plenty of women engineers as well as men, and I don't personally think that women are better at one thing than men or the other, but you know, in some cases maybe they are.
And again, just to reiterate, the premise of this conversation isn't that either of us is taking any particular position on it. What we're saying is, here's what we see, here's what's been measured, why might that be, and then what's the impact on business?
Exactly. So I think it's a combination of what women naturally gravitate to, and also maybe what, you know, the hirers are doing. So
All right, so that's marketing.
yeah.
How about sales? What's happening in the sales world? Gut feeling there? There's more men in sales than there are women. And there was an interesting tweet or post from HubSpot a couple of weeks ago that talked about that issue and the relative success rates.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So the gut feeling is, again, correct. It's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Sales reps and services, 27% women, 89% white. Sales reps in wholesale and manufacturing, 28% women, 90% white. So in terms of gender, it's the exact opposite of marketing. And let's see, according to LinkedIn, the percentage of women in sales has only increased 3% in the last decade. So that's kind of amazing. And again, it's the reverse of marketing. So I guess the same question applies. You know, why would that be? Is it just that there's so many women in marketing that men get pushed into sales? I guess that's one possibility.
I don't know. It seems like sales is a role that's often an entry-level role, right? But I guess on the other hand, there's a lot of marketing roles that are entry-level roles too, where there's degrees in marketing and people are hired coming out of school to go directly into those roles.
Yeah, I think education probably has a good bit to do with it. You know, and it starts early, in terms of this gender stereotyping. So, there's that too.
Now, I know you mentioned to me you found a really interesting statistic from Gartner about quota attainment. And so where there may be more men in sales, and there may be, and we could perhaps conclude from that there's a perception that men are more successful in sales. Gartner's statistic actually contests that. And why don't you share that number with us?
Yeah, well, according to Gartner, women's average quota attainment is 70%, while men's is 67. So they're really pretty much on equal footing, with women taking a slight lead. So I think some of that hiring bias has to do with old preconceived ideas about men being more aggressive or more concerned with money. In my experience, that's just not the case. It's just that I think men prefer, or maybe they're more inclined to hire men in sales roles based on those old stereotypes.
Well, it would be interesting, and we don't have those statistics now, but my gut feeling, if you look at some sales, like pharmaceutical sales, my guess is there's probably a pretty good gender equivalence, as opposed to, maybe people selling fork trucks is very much skewed toward men doing it. It's just, again, gut feeling.
Yeah, I'm sure. And it probably has to do with who you're selling to, too. Maybe men feel more comfortable selling to men, and women feel more comfortable selling to women. And that's probably true in marketing as well. We don't empathize with women, or we don't relate to them as well, as women do. So, and vice versa.
On the other hand, of course, the argument is, if somebody's making a decision for their business, if somebody manages a P&L, we're each individuals, and we each look at the world differently. And I'm sure there's some gender difference in the way we consider certain kinds of factors, but you're making a decision for the business. This is the outcome we need. And, this is the cost and the impact on the P&L. And that should be, I would think, largely gender neutral.
I would think so too, and as women gain more and more market share, so to speak, in leadership positions in B2B, you're going to see more of an equal playing field as well. So,
all right. So talking about leadership, let's talk through some quick stats on leadership in sales and marketing management. So in the marketing agency world, only 30.2% of leadership positions are held by women.
Right.
And
that's shocking to me. I had no idea. I mean, I guess you could have guessed that, but that's
what's interesting is there was also some powerful, small agencies that you and I both know that are run by women.
Right.
So that's an interesting statistic. 19% of leadership roles in sales are held by women.
Wow.
So, a much smaller number. But according to Gartner research, again, women tend to create more diverse teams as they run a department and hire the people for it. Women-led sales teams tend to be 50% women, while male-led sales teams are only 25% women. So an interesting sort of a kind of a distortion there. So again, here we come to this question: why these differences? What do you think?
Well, I think, an easy solution, you just mentioned it, would be to hire more, or to promote more women into leadership roles, especially in sales, where it's lagging so badly. To help promote more women, to help hire more women into roles that really don't necessarily, belong in the male sphere anymore. But it's complicated. It has a lot to do with what men and women want in their careers. A lot of people argue that women want more flexible roles once they start families, and of course men do too. But I don't know if that has a lot to do with it. In my experience, it doesn't. But I'm kind of focused on the agency world, and I think things tend to be somewhat equitable there, and you're more conscious of not abusing the system that's been set up to be equal, across the genders. So I don't know what it is. Maybe women are less aggressive about pushing themselves to management positions because they've been beaten back by men for so long. You know, that's a possibility, I guess. But I think that's certainly breaking down. I think more women are becoming entrepreneurs and startup leaders, and, you know, they're just going around the good old boy network. You know, they're starting their own deal, which is great. I really think that's the best solution of all.
So again, you know, as we're hypothesizing about these things, here comes this caveat. You know, these are just guesses, and I'm sure that anybody that wants to can find something objectionable about any of them, and, you know, they're sincerely delivered with the intent of trying to foster this conversation. Again, kind of coming to what we think is ultimately the crux of it, which is this structure is costing companies opportunity, and we're almost there. Another piece of this that is, I think, tangentially interesting, it doesn't necessarily drive the business outcomes piece that we're coming to, but you've also uncovered some interesting stuff about a significant pay gap. You want to take us through that?
Well, I might disagree with you a little bit there. I think it's actually critically important and almost shocking, you know, well, really shocking, actually. And that is that, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, again, women marketing and sales managers make 74 cents on a dollar that men make for the same jobs. So there's around a 26-cent pay gap for equivalent jobs, which I would have thought that would be something, you know, you'd see 10 or 15 years ago, maybe 20, and it's still the case. So, you know, and other statistics show that the pay gap for marketing and sales directors is 12%, while it's a little bit higher for lower ranking people in the marketing associates. It's around 17%. So there's a significant gap up and down, really, the ranks. And then just looking in terms of what's happened in the last year or so, it's narrowed. These pay gaps have narrowed by a couple percentage points, 2 or 3, you know, sort of across the board. But over the years, you know, it hasn't really changed that much. I don't have any data on that, but you know, it's widened for example, for female board directors, it's 18%. So I don't know how to explain this. You know, it's really, it doesn't belong in the conversation. You know, it goes against things we even have in our laws. And, you know, for the same job, men are making more money than women. It's that simple. And we need to do something about it, in my opinion.
The crazy thing about it, if you looked at it just purely from a selfish market perspective, put aside the question of, you know, the fact that it's inappropriate on a number of levels. But if a company knew that they could hire a really qualified person for less and a really qualified person for more, then it would make business sense to hire that really qualified person for less. And so I don't know how you reconcile the fact that there's a pay gap and there's smaller participation. There have to be other factors, you know, biases and preferences and perceptions, as opposed to just making simple business decisions. Because if it was a business decision, getting skills for a certain amount of money, you know, then this wouldn't exist. I can say that my experience with board compensation is that it tends to be fixed across the board. And so that number surprises me a little bit. That hasn't been my experience, but so this exists. A lot of people talk about it a lot. There hasn't been a lot of headway in overcoming it. What ideas do you have about ways to fix it, though?
Well, it doesn't make any sense to me, because when you're hiring, it ought to be for a position, and there ought to be, you know, criteria for the position, responsibilities and experience levels and all that kind of thing. Gender should not be one of them. You know, that's illegal, for one thing. So it's not about what the person is asking for a salary. It's about, you know, does this person fit the job description that you have out there? And if so, you pay them, what you had budgeted for that position, regardless of what this gender is. And that's the way we always hired when I was at Kuno Creative, and still do. And most agencies, I think, do that as well. I don't really know in the corporate world how this works, but that seems like a simple solution to me. Take gender out of the hiring process altogether.
Right.
And then when it comes to ethnic diversity, that's another one. You gotta have blinders on when it comes to race and, religion and all that stuff, and why some companies still cling to the kind of the more biased way of doing things. I don't know, but to me, that should be regulated against, and it should be frowned upon. But probably the biggest pressure to change it would come from the people themselves that are applying for jobs, because they're going to turn down companies that aren't equitable, that aren't fair, that aren't, don't have a good quality culture that, really values the work that they do. And
I think the other interesting research that I can't cite off the top of my head, but I've seen a fair amount of, is that, you can talk about diversity from a CSR perspective, corporate social responsibility, and how it's the right thing to do, and people expect it and all that. Or you can talk about it from the very basic business performance perspective. And real diversity, which means bringing people with different backgrounds and different skills and different perspectives to contribute to end up with a better outcome, leads to better commercial results. And
right.
And that ought to be the most compelling argument for it. And it's the one that I find astounding, that somehow, people don't just build their argument upon.
I agree with you. And I think that, combined with the talent gap that's out there, the difficulty in finding good people, it's a competitive marketplace in any industry nowadays.
Right.
So if you don't have all those things, tied up in a nice bow, then you're going to lose out on the best people, and that's going to hurt your bottom line as well.
And I think that bottom line argument is kind of where we started this discussion one day a couple of weeks ago. And the question that struck us as we were talking about it was, how can it be that you have owners or CEOs or COOs or whatever of kind of these industrial companies that we often talk about, that have very clear ideas about how they want to run the business, and they're almost always have a woman in this marketing role. And what struck us was that the marketing role, the importance of marketing in those companies, is often viewed in kind of a cavalier way. There's not a lot of value ascribed to marketing. And so then that got us thinking, are these companies thinking that marketing isn't that important, and so they put a woman into that job? Or are these companies hiring a marketer because so many of the marketers are women, they put a woman in the job, and then once they've got a woman in the job, they think, oh, well, we're accustomed to talking to men about this stuff, so they're not going to bring as much horsepower to the argument, and so marketing gets less of a emphasis? Or is marketing just not perceived as not important to those companies, and the rest of it happens to be, there's more women in those roles because there's more women in marketing, but it doesn't, we shouldn't read anything more into it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but the question becomes, whatever the reason is for it, what is it costing companies to not take marketing seriously, not put the right money into the budget, not put the best people into those roles, not have diverse teams with men and women in those groups and in the sales group, building that collaboration between them? So what do you think about all that?
Well, I think we talk about that a lot in our book, Common Sense Revenue Growth, for one thing. And the things that we arrive at are tied closely to, solving for the customer, really trying to understand the needs of the customer. And nowadays, that's really wrapped up in a complex sort of thing about working together as a team, sales, marketing, and customer service, using technology to really make sure you respond quickly to customers and have the right information across the board throughout the customer journey. And all of those things kind of wrap up into an organization that's not necessarily just marketing or sales or customer service. You might have 3 individuals heading up those groups, but they really work as a team.
Right.
And the value of all that is reflected in the numbers. So everything they're doing is measured, through technology and through all the processes they're using. So they can go to the board and say, look what we've done. We've raised, you can directly point to this growth in revenue to the efforts we're making in our groups. And, someone who's interested in getting a promotion can do the same thing. They can go to their immediate supervisor or higher up and say, look at what my team has done in the past 6 months, and it's not a matter of whether you're a woman or not anymore. It's a matter of proof that, ROI is right here. So I think that's the approach, we all need to take.
So the company needs to grow. The sales, marketing, customer service people need to work together. Those teams need to be balanced so that they're coming up with the best version of themselves because they've got great minds with different perspectives that work together. And then those teams coalescing together need to be the best version of themselves by bringing the different ideas and perspectives together. And that's really the only way that you can achieve consistent commercial success. I mean, is that a fair way to say it?
That's perfect. Yep. So I think we've solved the world's gender problems. Once more, we're victorious.
But I guess the acid test would be if we go to inbound next year and we see, gender parity or something closer to it, and more ethnic and racial diversity among that group, and see people plugging into different roles where they're bringing that perspective and improving the work and the product and the outcome for their companies because they're bringing that different perspective.
I sure hope so. I think we'll see that certainly in the next 2, 3, 5 years. I hope it doesn't take that long, but people are starting to wake up.
So I'm sure that everybody listening to this has been offended by something that we've said. Let me just reiterate that what we're saying is not making declarations where we've got some facts, some research, we're hypothesizing about why those things might be. But in the end, what we're saying is that we believe that that this current status has a deleterious effect on corporate performance. And that's really the bottom line and the most concrete reason from a commercial perspective to address it.
Absolutely.
So it's been an interesting conversation. If you're unhappy, direct your comments to John, and he'll tell me which ones I need to pay attention to. But seriously, it's a pleasure to have you all listening and watching. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ed.
And I'm John. We'll see you next time.